we're going to have a really cool conversation with Dr. Shefali today, all about raising sisters, kids, specifically sisters, because the past couple episodes that we have done so far in the theme of sisterhood with sisters, talking about sisters, my sister and I did an episode. A lot of you have written in asking how to raise girls to not be competitive, not be jealous, to raise them to have really great and strong relationships. So when they're older, they can be really close, and how to get through rocky times in their relationships as a parent, and also some of you asking about it as a sister yourselves. So we're going to get to that and ask her all about that, because it's very tricky, and I myself, raising girls, want to know more all the time, because they won't. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. It's so great to be here to honor your book. I love the title and what you're talking about. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, thank you for coming. I've been watching all of your videos about your book that's coming out really soon as well. That is so fascinating to me. I mean, all of your tips and tricks as a new parent myself are just like so fascinating and so interesting. And I love the way that you share them as like digestible little nuggets of wisdom. So thank you for that as well. And I'm so excited for you. So thank you for coming and chatting with us today. I mean, we're talking about sisterhood. We're talking about, sisters, that relationship, which is such a special one and such an incredible one. And also, I think for a lot of people, sometimes can be a challenging one. And for people who are raising girls like myself, there's always questions about, what to do and what not to do to kind of nurture that relationship and that bond between your kids at the very beginning, and learning as a parent. And then also just as someone myself who has a sister and who knows about the ups and downs of a sister dynamic. And of course, my sister and I are best friends and talk a million times a day, but also just wanting to be mindful of that as a parent. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to do this, because I had noticed over the past couple weeks that so many people were writing in about just wanting to know more about how to be a really great parent to daughters, and also how to fix certain sister relationships, maybe later in life in general. So I want to know like everything. I know that we don't have time for everything, but I want to just know, like, first of all, let's start by being a conscious parent, because that's what your whole everything is all about. And I think that that is also really special with people who might be coming into raising daughters with their own history with a sister, or just, wanting to be really mindful of that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a conscious parent?
Sure. So in a real nutshell, conscious parenting is really when the parent understands that they are raising themselves as much as they're raising their children. So every invitation with their child pulls them toward asking themselves, is this about me? How am I putting my crap on my kids? And especially with mothers and daughters and fathers and sons, the same gender, we have a tendency to really put on our children our own stuff, right? It's so easy to do. So mothers need to be very aware that how they are toward themselves is being absorbed by their daughters. And it's going to come out. Like if you were a good girl, or you were somebody who was very compliant, and then you have a really boisterous daughter, that's going to go against your conditioning, and you're going to be nervous, and you're going to get angry with that daughter or suppress that daughter. So one of the things we have to be really mindful of in raising daughters, period, is how our own conditioning, especially as little girls, is coming into the equation, and how that can affect our daughters' self-esteem. Our daughters are watching us, how we put our makeup on, how we get ready in the morning, how we eat our salad or our steak. They're watching it all. So our attitude towards ourselves is the first place to start, right?
And when you notice that, or when you're aware of that pattern, let's say you, like the example that you just used, you were somebody who as a child was very rule following, or, did things a specific way. And then you have a daughter who might be doing the complete opposite that you did. And you can notice that in yourself as being something that's different for you. How do you, how do you make the best of that situation to not let that negatively impact your relationship with your daughter?
Well, I think the core of conscious parenting, and I talk about it in my new book, it's called The Parenting Map.
Yes.
I really go into how we as parents need to realize completely and fundamentally that our children are not our mini puppets. They're not a version of us. Therefore, we cannot project anything onto them, like anything. So if we were good girls, we cannot project that onto our children. So our children are completely unique, completely different. They're not enmeshed with us. They are ultimately sovereign beings. So first we have to understand that, like, so when we look at our kid, we cannot even compare them to us. Like we say, oh, I wasn't like that. There's no comparison. It's like comparing giraffes and monkeys. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's like completely different time, completely different generation, and completely different set of circumstances. So we have to really shatter that instinct to compare, because that's the same instinct that is the number one problem in siblings. When you compare yourself with your kids, then you're always kind of pitting yourself in a particular way and then pitting your child in another way. And then you're judging your child. Your child will begin to pick up that you don't like the way they authentically are because it doesn't look like your way. But that same comparison is what we do between siblings. And that's the number one thing we have to completely avoid, but become aware of. That's what divides siblings apart. When we compare one with the other, even subconsciously, like, oh, Katherine picked up all her dishes and soaked her dishes. What about Becky? Becky, did you do that? Like we can say, Becky, go clean the dishes, but we can't compare her to Katherine. And we parents love to say we don't have favorites, but that's so not true. Right? The favorite
I'd love to just get my mom on here to ask her that.
But I think your mom was so amazing. I bet every kid goes, I was the favorite. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
the best kind of mom, who makes every kid feel like each one is their favorite.
Yeah.
But this idea of favorite is also such a skewed, toxic notion, mm-hmm. because each kid has some things that are going to be easier for the parent to deal with, and some things that the kid is not. But the parent has to be very clear in their demeanor that just because one kid is getting the gold stars or the great grades doesn't make that kid the favorite kid. So the next point, the first thing is, don't compare your kids. Don't use them one against the other. The next thing is, try as a parent not to focus on the doing a lot when you have siblings. I'll tell you what that means. When one kid gets a lot of the doing, like gets the good grades, is a great athlete, wins all the trophies, but the other kid is just a kid, like not doing anything. If you keep focusing on the doing in your household, then the kid who is not an amazing doer is going to feel lesser than. So I tell parents, you have to really focus on who they are and not what they do. So say Sam got 3 gold medals, but Matthew got none on sports day. Okay. We need to give the message, yeah, that's great, Sam, but we don't care if you got 20 or 10 or 0. We don't want to take away from Sam's gold medals, but we don't want to make it a big deal so that Matthew feels bad, right? We just want to act like that's great, but we don't expect anything from anyone. We're happy if you get the medal or if you don't get the medal, especially when there's a competition between the siblings. You grew up with siblings. Did you feel that pressure to compete?
Well, I think it's like, I think when you have two siblings that are the same gender or are close in age, I feel like that's when it's more complicated, because like I'm the oldest in my family, and I never, I think for Christina and I, my sister and I are 19 months apart and very similar age difference for my two daughters. And when her and I were sitting and talking, doing a live conversation together, we talked a lot about growing up, and that, you know, our parents really tried to celebrate each of us and our interests separate from one another. And there was always, you know, very much like you're talking about, like, this is great. And even if you didn't, you know, win or you didn't do that, that's totally fine. We love you no matter what, that kind of a feeling. And I feel like she definitely felt like there was a lot of comparison to me as the oldest, like doing things like I did, or people, you know, wondering, are you going to do what your older sibling did? Part of that I feel like is just natural for people to be compared to the one above the other one. Like I think if the two girls had been in the middle, there would always be the one, you know, a younger one being compared to an older one when it's the same gender. But I just wonder when it comes to, you know, the comparisons that happen oftentimes, I feel like for parents who are conscious parents and mindful parents who don't have the comparing language in your household, it feels like it comes a lot from outside the household, right? Like
Right.
people coming to you and saying like, oh, your older sister did this, are you going to do that? Or, oh, this child, even to me now, like my older daughter is 2.5 and my younger one is 8 months, they're like, oh, is Eloise doing this the way Lila did, or is she doing? And so it's also about like, how do you as a parent correct the language without making someone feel like they're doing something wrong, but allow your child to also not feel like, oh, am I supposed to be compared to each other? Because it is hard when they're so close in age and the same gender.
Yes, yes. So we have to really resist that urge. It's very, you know, typical of parents and neighbors and cousins to put kids together, that they're
Mm-hmm.
just being lazy about it. But at home, you can make sure that each one understands, well, that's what Eloise does. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what Ruth does. And that's what Marie does. And really help each kid feel empowered in their own thing. So therefore, try not to send them to the same school. Try not to put them in the same classes, because they need to develop out of that comparison matrix as much as you can. Now, many times the parent doesn't have the bandwidth to go driving all parts of town,
Mm-hmm.
but you try to let each one know that they are meant to be themselves and they're not supposed to be following each other's footsteps. So even as simple as, you know, not putting them in the same clothes, or not buying, you know, two of everything, because we as parents, we kind of get lazy, so we just buy five of the same things. Well, what that does is that it doesn't distinguish each one as their own being. And that's what you want to do as much as you can, to try to create that individual sense of they have every right to be themselves and can choose to be nothing like the other kids.
That was a, you know, a conversation point that came up when my sister and I were doing our conversation together, which was, you know, how important it was for her and I to go to separate schools when we were in high school, because we were one grade apart, and there was a lot of, you know, sharing of friends, sharing of social scenes, and she really liked that. And when I was in high school, I kind of wanted my independence from
Right.
that. But I mean, which I totally understand now, of course, but I think when they're little, like I find myself now, I'm like, oh, it's so cute to put them in matching outfits, and it's so cute to be able to like have those photo moments. And I even find myself with a lot of moments like comparing, you know, their relationship to how Christina and I were as children. And I think that there are like fun things of doing it like lighthearted, and then there are also probably negative parts of that that might make them feel like they have to have like an exact same relationship that my sister and I had.
Yeah, you have that ideal relationship in your mind, so you're going to be putting that on them. So part of the good part of that is that you will encourage them to be best friends and encourage them to share their world and their experiences. But what you could get into a little tricky mess about is that you will have a problem if they don't like each other as much as you and Christina like each other, or and then you're going to be really devastated because, and you're
Right.
going to feel like it's personal, like something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But many siblings are not each other's, you know, best friends, and that's
Yeah.
okay too.
Yeah.
So be careful that you don't project that onto them and push them beyond what's coming naturally to them as well.
Yeah, I think it's also, you know, when we reflect on our relationships, I mean, now I'm 33 years old and, you know, my sister and I have, you know, had moments when we were younger, especially when we shared certain things or, you know, I was like, this is mine or this is yours. And we would fight over like a hair elastic or a hair clip, those kinds of things that would make us in the moment back then say like, oh, we're not best friends, or we could never imagine ourselves being best friends. And, you know, my mom didn't grow up with a sister, so she would support that dynamic to the best of her ability and not force us to do certain things, but also be understanding that like, you don't have to be close or be best friends the entire time you're growing up, because you can have differences or like different interests when you're growing up.
Yeah, so you as a mom will have to tolerate that there'll be seasons they're together, seasons that they're going to not want to look at each other, but they have a right to develop their own relationship. And I think once all siblings grow up, things kind of change for people. But sometimes they grow even further apart. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, make sure that you stay in a clean space of not wanting something out of this. Like, oh, they look so cute in the same outfit, is also you wanting them to look like your cute little dolls. uh, right, it's
Yes.
so cute, it is cute, but be careful because implicitly you may be bunching them together, and that's going to one day be problematic. Another thing that parents do without realizing is that they, you know, when the kids are having a fight, the parent thinks that they need to be a referee, right? Let me find out who's the one who needs to be reprimanded. Let me see who started this. Like parents will always say, who started this? And I always tell parents, it started when, you know, they were in the womb. What do you mean, who started this?
Mm-hmm.
This is not about one wicked kid and one defenseless kid, but that's what parents often start taking sides. And the
Mm-hmm.
minute you take sides and make one the poor child and one the evil child, you have now compounded your problems and you've created animosity and rivalry between them. What you need to just say is, what's going on? Yesterday, Matthew, you went first. So today I'm going to let Sam go first. And each one of you gets to tell me, and what do you each need? How can we do it better? End of story, right? And also restrict the urge to jump in every time and rescue the situation because you want happy children,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you have siblings, you tend to want them to be happy all the time, to love each other all the time, you know, and every parent's heart aches when one says about the other, I hate him. Why did you have him? Because, and you're like, I had this kid for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what age do we think that like it's not, we should stop dressing them like magic?
I think
Like,
very
is there like an
soon.
age bracket there that we should just be like, okay, now you should? Because I remember it very well. I remember when Christina and I started dressing differently. Like it was a whole time when all of a sudden, like, you know, I liked to wear one thing very specifically, and Christina liked to wear a completely different thing very specifically. And then we started just kind of like, you know, matching on certain holidays, but it was like, you know, okay, now we each have our own identity and Christina likes these things and I like these things.
I think if you want to make your life easier, especially in today's generation where children are much more savvy, you start younger, the better. So maybe by 3. Right now, they don't have that awareness
Mm-hmm.
of how other people are looking at them, but they're getting aware that, oh, we look alike. People talk to us like we're one identity. So I think by the age, the older one turning 3 is a good time to go, what do you like?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, your Eloise likes this, and what do you like, right? Like, oh, we're trying to get them to tap into themselves, because that's what you want anyway, is for each one to understand that they are their own being and they can govern their own choices. So you want to encourage that from an early age anyway.
Yeah. What do you do or suggest when it comes to one sibling leaving the other one out? We had a couple questions from parents who are raising daughters who are wondering what to do when one says, I don't want to play with the other sibling, and wanting to do their own things separate, but you as a parent want them to do things and always be included. That was something that my mom always said: include your siblings, include this, include your cousin, include. And it was always a theme, especially in our summers when we would gather as a large family, was all about including the other kids. And I think that there's obviously, now as a parent myself, you understand it and you get it. And then, you know, there's part of you when you're younger where you're like, I want to do something separate from my sibling. But what would be your advice for parents struggling with their kids not wanting to play with one another?
You know, I think that, you know, when they're very young, I don't think they understand, you know, equity and fairness and inclusion. So I think forcing young children is just going against who they are. So you let them do and learn that it's okay if Samantha doesn't want to play with you. Samantha doesn't have to play with you all the time. And she then, and you know, Martha is like, oh, Samantha always leaves me out. It's okay. Samantha wants to play with her friends. It's okay. Also, as important as inclusion is, so is letting people be who they are and not taking it personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially the younger one wanting to be included with the older one's friends. It's not going to happen. So teaching them, right? Teaching them. And it's a burden, I think, for the older one to feel like they have to constantly carry the younger one around, right? So we want to help them each have their own social circles. It's okay if you're not included. They're her friends. You can have your friends out another day. I can play with you, or we can find something to do. I think teaching tolerance rather than forcing an enmeshed, forced relationship is always the better way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's as if a popular kid in the classroom has a birthday party and doesn't invite your kid. Imagine everyone's invited but your kid. It's the same thing. You have to teach your kid that it's okay. We can find something to do. Maybe, you know, you and that kid are not the best friends. It's okay. We have to teach our kids to be kind of anti-fragile, right? Not fall apart all the time.
Right.
So we have to teach them anti-fragility, meaning it's okay. Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to want to play with you. You don't have to be entertained all the time by your older sibling. You can be okay on your own. I think that's very powerful. I think inclusion is lovely when we're big, you know, parties gathering together, lots of cousins, but on a day-to-day basis, I think giving siblings the freedom to, it's okay. Then you're not constantly trying to glue these two people together. That's not your job.
It's also probably healthy long term to be able to have a child feel comfortable being alone, because I feel like there's so many moments now with even my friends where I feel like if you haven't had children yet and you are alone, there's like a feeling of being uncomfortable being alone.
Yes. So it starts in the sibling dynamic. It's a great place to teach your kid. If you're not invited to a party or to a game, meaning your sibling goes and plays with someone else, that's a great way to practice. It's okay. They have a right to go. You can do something on your own. Being alone is not a curse. So this is all practice for teaching children to be more resilient and empowered. I think it places a great burden on the children if they feel left to constantly include the other in their activities.
What do you suggest for kids who have similar interests, or maybe the younger one wants to do something similar to the older one, but the older one does not want the younger one to do something the same? So if an older child is interested in dance and the younger child also wants to do dance, but the older one wants independence, to be their own person, do you as a parent naturally take the younger child into exploring other activities or interests, or do you allow them to just do the same thing?
Well, the ideal answer is always create your own identity. So, but it's difficult. It's not practical. If you have kids 18 months apart and one wants hip hop and one wants ballet and it's in the same building, you're going to put them in the same building. But you try to kind of, I wouldn't say that if both want hip hop, you talk one out of it, but you try to find a different schedule, a different class. I can tell you that, I don't know how it was for you, but comparison is just natural and it can often be toxic. It can lead to a lot of toxicity, you know.
Yeah, I think that it's for us in our family, we definitely understood that growing up with certain comparisons and even comparisons to other family members or parents. Like there's always comparison, I think that's somewhat natural. And it's also about how you interpret it or hear it as the person that's, you know, being compared. And then also now as a parent, like how do you allow children to understand, yes, you're going to be compared, and here's how we can respond to it if it's something that's not familiar when they're at home.
Yeah, it's constant conversations. So if Becky says, "Oh, mom, you know, Auntie Stacy just told me that I'm not as thin as Samantha, or I'm not as pretty as Samantha." You know, relatives can say the most absurd, cruel things.
Yeah.
So we can then ask them to talk about their feelings. How did that feel? Wow, that sucks. Would you like to tell Auntie Stacy something? I'll support you. Would you like me to say something? Because it's not okay for her to compare you. Like you can tell your kids it's not okay for me to compare you or other people to compare you, because you are your own person. But also teach them that people are always going to be unconscious and say things that hurt us, so we don't have to go crazy. We can learn to process it. And if you're an open space for those conversations, I think that's useful, you know. But I think parents going in, you know, having kids close together like you did, it's a challenge, you know. It's a constant challenge, especially if one is some sort of outlier superstar and
Mm-hmm.
one is just regular average kid. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes a competition that's very severe.
Yeah. What do you suggest when it comes to people wanting to repair their relationships with their siblings later in life? There were a lot of people who, when my sister and I did our conversation, said, oh, they tried to have a close relationship with their sibling. It didn't work out. They would love to try and mend it as adults, but don't know how to.
You know, at the end of the day, once we grow up, we do become our own people. And it's
Mm-hmm.
hurtful because society has told us that siblings should be close. But really, just like families become families of choice versus families of origin, siblings also, you know, you need to find siblings of choice. So if something is not naturally working out, we need to release that person, because they were biologically connected to us doesn't mean that they are emotionally or spiritually connected to us. So we need to learn to release people as adults and create siblings of choice, families of choice, who are more a match for your emotional and spiritual development. Just because somebody is biologically related to you doesn't mean they're going to be in your life forever.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who, especially when they were younger, felt like out of place in their family dynamic or felt uncomfortable with, you know, the family that maybe they were born into. As you get older, especially around, you know, gathering times or holiday times, can find that to be incredibly challenging and painful. But I think what people appreciate about what you're saying is validating that and saying that that's okay.
Yeah, and it's all across the board. You know, as we become adults, we can appreciate our biological relatives and we can even take care of them and have great compassion. But to have them in our lives on a day-to-day basis should be something we are careful about if they are not of the same level of consciousness as us.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to distance from people. It feels like anathema because we've been told that families should eat together, live together, die together, right? That's our idea of a good family. But that's a toxic idea because everybody has a different level of consciousness. And we have the right to say, you know what, this person's consciousness, I love this person, I grew up with this person, but it doesn't work for me anymore.
Right.
And to distance yourself from them, because you have a right as an adult to be free. You don't have to be bound by family roots and relationships, although you can continue to take care of them, but you can release yourself on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. I'm seeing that like we're already over time, but I'm like, this is so helpful and also so interesting to me having all these conversations the past couple weeks just with different sisters, and as an adult now with my own sister and being able to have her and I reflect on our relationship and all the different, you know, ebbs and flows of our dynamic, and then seeing my own girls and also just hearing how many different people are curious about this subject when it comes to raising kids who are, you know, you want them as parents to get along and to be close. And if they're the same gender, especially in close in age, like how do you do that? And I think it really all comes down to being a conscious parent, like you're saying. And I think your book is going to be so helpful, not only to me, but also just to so many people who have this like-minded goal of wanting to be a really conscious and great parent that's for each child, and coming into this role of a parent, you know, being mindful of what you're bringing in with you. So I'm so excited to read your book, and thank you for being supportive of my book too.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me, and good luck with your book launch. It's called
Thank you.
Goodnight. It's called Goodnight Sister. Do you have a copy?
Yes, Good Night Sister.
Oh.
I have mine, and I'm so excited to just launch this book, talk about sisterhood, learn from you about raising sisters, raising girls, being a conscious parent. And I'm so excited for your book as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Mine is called The Parenting Map.
So great.
We both are releasing our books, but congratulations. Thank you for what you're doing. It's so important.
Thank you.
We will catch each other soon. Bye, everyone.
Yes. Bye. Thank you.